Hello, guys. What's up? It's September 26th, and this is Effed Up News of the Week, a little show that I do for fun on Sundays to go over some of the news stories that I just haven't had a chance to cover yet this week. And I had to tell you because I was so focused this week on the article that we released about the white positivity movement. If you have not seen that yet, please go back and watch my stream on Wednesday, read the article in the description, all that good stuff. But because I was so focused on that this week, there's a lot of kind of crazy stuff that I skipped over. I actually really enjoyed putting together the segments for this week. Now, don't get me wrong. There was like a lot a lot of effed up stuff that happened this week. There is no remote possible way that I can cover all of the effed up stuff that happened this week. So I kind of chose the ones that I personally found the most amusing. So we're gonna go with that. But before we jump into it, guys, we got a couple orders of business to take care of. Effed up news is brought to you by, if I can get to my screen up, my locals community. Locals is the best place on the internet. It is the place where I get to connect with people to have authentic conversations, authentic engagement. We do that by having a couple of Zoom calls every single week. We have them on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We have book club, we have debate club, we have a community Discord server. We are going to have another craft and bitch coming up where we just basically sit around. Basically, craft and bitch is kind of like a Zoom call, except that we do crafts. You can do whatever crafts you want. I, of course, am knitting, which is the far superior craft to all other crafts. But we have some people who draw. We have some people who quilt. We have some people who crochet for reasons past my understanding. We even have some people who come on our craft and bitch calls and do stained glass. Everyone does beautiful work, but in order to get in on those calls, you have to be a member of my locals community, kb.locals.com. You can join for free just to check it out and to see what's going on. But if you want to unlock all the features of locals and support the work I do, it really helps me out if you become a supporter. You can do that at $5 a month or more, but you're under no obligation to give more. $5 is fine. Or you can do an annual membership for $50 a year, which gives you 2 free months. And then, of course, you can always make a one-time gift over at kb.locals.com. But guess what, guys? This isn't the only shameless shilling I'm going to do today. Because just yesterday, hang on, let me remove this from the screen. Just yesterday, I got a little present. I got a present from my friends at bringammo.com. It's kind of hard to see. I got this lovely green t-shirt that says, "Don't be a vaxhole." Let me bring it up so you can see exactly what we're talking about. I love bringammo.com. Bringammo.com is easily one of my favorite sites on the internet. I have so many of their t-shirts. I'm going to show you some of the other ones I have, but they sent me this one in particular, which is the "Don't be a vaxhole" t-shirt, which I think is pretty great. Now, of course, YouTube, we're getting all of our vaccine information from the CDC. This is for fun because we know that the CDC tells us that the vaccine is just perfect and lovely and awesome, and everyone should consult the CDC as their prime source of inspiration. This is just having fun, YouTube, but you can get it in a whole bunch of different colors. Check this out. I have this awesome green one. I love this green. You never see t-shirts in this green. It's going to be great to wear for St. Patrick's Day, all that good stuff. We also have a gray one. They've got a black one. I got a blue one. All sorts of good stuff. But bringammo.com is also great. I've got this t-shirt right here, the scan for my vaccine passport. This goes to the Constitution. I've got this Fauci clown nose one. I've got this Fauci lied one. I've worn this all over the place. I get compliments on this one all the time. So bringammo.com has lots and lots and lots of amazing stuff. And the reason I wanted to tell you guys about it is not only because I genuinely love this t-shirt, but because you can get 10% off your entire order at Bring Ammo by using my name, Carlyn, Karlyn, as a promo code in the checkout. So go get your shopping on, guys. They've got lots of good stuff. All right. We're streaming on a bunch of different platforms today. Of course, we are on my main YouTube channel. We are also on Facebook. We are also on Odyssey. We are also on Rockfin. Please make sure you mount that like button or the little flame if you're on Odyssey, whatever you happen to be on. Please make sure you're subscribed on whatever channel you're watching on, especially on YouTube, because YouTube likes to unsubscribe people from my channel. I hear about this all the effing time. YouTube likes to unsubscribe people from my channel. So while you're here, while we're going to spend some time together, just make sure you're subscribed. Just do a quick double check, turn on notifications, all that good stuff. All right, let's jump right into it. Now, do you guys remember a couple weeks ago? Maybe it was like a month ago or so. I don't know. It was a little while ago. Do you guys remember that I talked about how oppression against Italian people was starting to make a comeback? Because in White Fragility, on page 12, I actually know the page number off the top of my head. This is when it's going to start to get really scary. In White Fragility, on page 12, Robin DiAngelo specifically says that Italian people cannot be discriminated against because they have ascended to whiteness. Well, Robin needs to hold on to her hat because a couple months ago, maybe now at this point, I discovered that people are starting to use this new term called Italian X. Okay, I didn't discover it. I'm not like Christopher Columbus or anything, but I became informed of the fact that people were using Italian X and that it's a serious thing. And I walked you guys through some of this Italian X discrimination. Italian people are often stereotyped as mafia bosses and chefs and often can't go through their jobs at pizzerias without being made fun of for their annoying accents and erased from their status as WPOC. WPOC stands for white people of color. Also, modern culture often spreads anti-Italian X dog whistle slurs, which will be discussed now. Now, we're not going to go through this whole thing because I have a whole video on this separately. But a lot of people thought this was fake. This is not fake. This is real. Italian X discrimination is a real thing. And I'm going to prove it to you. Because this week, our very first story is about how Chris Pratt has been cast in Super Mario Brothers. Casting angers Italians and Nintendo fans. Let's read. It's a Mario miscast. Nintendo sparked an uproar on Italian-American social media after revealing the Anglo-American star Chris Pratt, 42, would voice everyone's favorite Italian plumber in the upcoming Super Mario Bros. Movie. The Japanese video game giant revealed the controversial casting decision via Nintendo Direct Thursday. We are collaborating with Chris and his experienced team to not just create a character, licensed film, but a new piece of entertainment which brings Super Mario Bros. To life on the screen, said Mario creator and representative director. I ain't going to try to pronounce that name. I'm sorry. Let's see. Joining the Guardians of the Galaxy actor in the voiceover cast are Charlie Day as Mario Brothers Luigi, the Queen Gambit star, Anna Taylor-Joy, blah, blah, blah. Each voice actor was cast for their ability to capture the unique spirit of the character. However, Nintendo fans begged to differ when it came to Pratt playing the turtle hammering toileteer. Danny DeVito should have been cast as Mario, not Chris Pratt. We were robbed, lamented one critic, along with a pic of the Italian-American actor as the mushroom-munching plumber. Yes, New York Post actually said mushroom munching. We're going to overlook that for right now. Chris Pratt was playing Mario is Italian phobia. I don't even know. Italia-phobia. We're going to go with that. Italia-phobia. And I'm tired of acting like it isn't, bemoaned another incensed social media watchdog. Does anyone want to take a guess at who this incensed social media watchdog was? Because he actually popped up in another thing this week that I just think is kind of funny. That incensed social media watchdog quoted by the New York Post is our friend Hassan, who you might all remember as the guy who got retweeted by Nicki Minaj for the thing the other week. Okay, he shows up a lot. Interesting. One poster even shared a GIF from Sopranos referencing Sylvia Dante's immortal line, "It's anti-Italian discrimination." Let's take a look at that real quick. Let's take a look. I didn't have this pulled up. Look at this. Oh my god. Oh my god. Interestingly, few criticized the character of Mario himself, who is an Italian caricature created by a Japanese gamer whose name I'm not going to pronounce. The casting choice also irked many Nintendo fans as well. F this casting celebrities as video game characters in their movie thing. Vented one Nintendo diehard who argued the role should have gone to Charles, who voiced Mario in the video game since 1990, who wants to see them reinvent Mario to act like Chris Pratt. But I also wanted to look at, just so you guys know that this is actually like a real thing. Let's just look up Italian X on Twitter. Let's just look up Italian X on Twitter and see what we find. Because people are tweeting all sorts of stuff about how casting Chris Pratt in this role, look at this, not this, Italian X erasure. When did this become a real thing? I can't even. Sickened by this Italian X erasure. The whitewashing of Italian X individuals from conversations pertaining to the Italian X experience are so disheartening. Whenever we think we found some kind of representation, it just gets ripped away. Remember Koreans also engaging in Italian X erasure. Chris Pratt is an Italian. Charlie Day is. Welcome to the Italian X discourse, video game reporters. So this is a real thing. Italians, congratulations. How many Italian people do we have in the chat today? How many people now feel like they're ready to claim their Italian X oppression points? Remember, you weren't able to be discriminated against like 4 years ago. Oh, what a difference 4 years makes. Robin DiAngelo said you were white. Robin DiAngelo said you had ascended to whiteness. And now Italians, congratulations, you're back in the game. They can discriminate against you once again because you have X after your name now. So congratulations on your ascension to oppression. Bet some of you had no idea you were going to find out you were oppressed today. You know, it's just how it works. But that's not the only thing that is, shall we say, a little problematic. Now, do you guys remember maybe like a month ago or so, I streamed a school board meeting from Exeter, New Hampshire, when the school board was like basically unveiling their social justice plan to the community, and the community was responding live, and all those based parents got up and asked exactly the right questions. Was anyone around for that particular live stream? Because that live stream was awesome. It was awesome because all these parents they got up and they totally eviscerated these people by asking exactly the right questions. But I bring that up because in that meeting, one of the things that one of the woke parents wanted to discuss was, why aren't they calling justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion Jedi? And apparently there's a reason for it. Apparently the term Jedi is problematic for describing programs that promote justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. They're meant to be heroes within the Star Wars universe, but the Jedi are inappropriate symbols for justice work. Congratulations, Jedis are now oppressors. This from Scientific American. The acronym JEDI has become a popular term for branding academic committees and labeling STEM with 2 M's. I didn't realize that STEM got another M. Okay, that's exciting. Science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and medicine initiatives focus on social justice issues. Used in this context, JEDI stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. In recent years, the acronym has been employed by a growing number of prominent institutions and organizations, including the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. Because if there's anyone that we want practicing equity, it is the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. At first glance, Jedi may simply appear to be an elegant way to explicitly build justice into a more common formula for DEI, an abbreviation for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Notice they never quite got around to adopting the DIE acronym popularized by GAD-SAD, because of course they're not going to do that. Productively shifting our ethical focus in the process. Jedi has these important affordances, but also inherits another notable set of meanings. It shares a name with the superheroic protagonists of the science fiction Star Wars franchise, the Jedi. Well, one might argue that Star Wars was actually the first to popularize the term Jedi, and that if it hadn't been for Star Wars popularizing the term Jedi, we really wouldn't be able to have this conversation right now. Right now. Within the narrative of Star Wars, to be a member of the Jedi is seemingly to be a paragon of goodness, a principal guardian of order, and protector of the innocent. This set of pop cultural associations is one that some Jedi initiative and advocates explicitly allude to. Whether intentionally or not, the labels we choose for our justice oriented initiatives open them up to a broader universe of associations, branding them with meaning and, in the case of Jedi, binding them to consumer brands. Through its connections to Star Wars, the name Jedi can inadvertently associate our justice work with stories and stereotypes that are a galaxy far, far away from the values of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. The question we must ask is whether the conversation started by those connections are the ones we want to have. Okay, correct me if I'm wrong. My husband is the Star Wars fan in my family. I've seen all the Star Wars movies. Don't get me wrong. I enjoyed some of them more than I enjoyed others. But for all the Star Wars nuts in the chat, correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't Princess Leia like one of the first kick ass women heroes, especially in like sci fi movies? Wasn't that a pretty big moment for diversity, equity, and inclusion to have like the main role, a hero role in an action, sci-fi, whatever the hell you want to call it, movie played by a woman? Wasn't she like iconic? Like, am I wrong about that? Then why are we saying this is problematic? I don't understand. What do these people have against Princess Leia? That character is badass. No matter how you feel about the Star Wars franchise, and yes, again, and by the way, like Star Wars? P.S. Isn't Star Wars like the ultimate in inclusion? They didn't even just include humans; they included all different kinds of species. Jesus, these people just ruin everything. It's like you have the ultimate version of inclusion where you're not just including people of all different races and genders and whatnot. You're being species inclusive. Even of Jar Jar Binks, who is the most annoying character ever in the history of movies. Is that not good enough? Is it not good enough that you are including every major species in the galaxy in your group? Everyone was included. God. As we will argue, our justice oriented products should approach connections to the Jedi and Star Wars with great caution and perhaps even avoid the acronym Jedi entirely. The Jedi are inappropriate mascots for social justice. Although they're ostensibly heroes within the Star Wars universe, the Jedi are inappropriate symbols for justice work. They are a religious order of intergalactic police monks. They're branding them as the police specifically. Holy shit. I'm going to read this full sentence because apparently this full sentence is even better than the first part of the sentence. They are a religious order of intergalactic police monks prone to white saviorism and toxically masculine approaches to conflict resolution, violent duels with phallic lightsabers, gaslighting by the means of Jedi mind tricks. This is in Scientific American. Okay, I'm sorry. I have to read that sentence one more time because that sentence is like the best sentence I've ever read in my life. This is why the Jedi are problematic. The Jedi are a religious order of intergalactic police monks prone to white saviorism and toxically masculine approaches to conflict resolution, violent duels with phallic lightsabers, gaslighting by means of Jedi mind tricks. The Jedis are also an exclusionary cult. They included everyone. Okay. Membership to which is partly predicted on the possession of heightened psychic and physical abilities or force sensitivity. Strikingly, force wielding talents are narratively explained in Star Wars not merely in spiritual terms, but also in ableist and eugenic ones. Holy crap. These supernatural powers are naturalized and biological heredity attributes. So, It is the Force potential is framed as a dynastic property of noble bloodlines. For example, the Skywalker dynasty, and Force disparities are rendered innate physical properties measurable via MIDI. I don't know what that word is. Sorry. I'm not the Star Wars nut in my family. The heroic Jedi are thus emblems for a host of dangerously reactionary values and assumptions, sending the message that justice work is akin to cosplay is bad enough. Dressing up our initiatives in the symbolic garb of the Jedi is worse. This caution about Jedi can be generalized. We must be intentional about how we name our work and mindful of the associations any name may bring up, perhaps particularly when such names doubles as existing words with complex histories. That's just the first point. Let's keep going. Star Wars has a problematic cultural legacy. The space opera franchise has been critiqued for trafficking in injustices such as sexism, racism, and ableism. Think, for example, of the so called slave Leia costume infamous for stripping down and chaining up the movie series' first leading woman as part of an Orientalist subplot. Star Wars arguably conflates alienness with non whiteness. I had no idea this article was going to be so good. Star Wars arguably conflates alienness with non-whiteness, often seeming to rely on racist stereotypes when depicting non-human species. This series regularly defaults into ableist tropes memorable in its portrayal of Darth Vader, which links the villain's physical ability with a mechanic inhumanity and moral deviance, presenting his technology-assisted breathing as sinister auditory marker of danger and doom. What's more, the bodies and voices centered in Star Wars have, with few exceptions, historically been those of white men. And while recent films have increased gender and racial diversity, important questions remain regarding how meaningfully such changes represent a departure from the series' problematic past. Indeed, a notable segment from Star Wars fandom has aggressively advocated the recentering of white men in the franchise while equating recent casting decisions with white genocide. Additionally, the franchise's cultural footprint can be tracked in the saga of the United States military industrial investment and expansion, from debates around Reagan's Star Wars Strategic Defense Initiative to the planned Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure, another Jedi program, sometimes winkingly framed with Star Wars allusions. Taken together, the controversies surrounding Star Wars make Jedi, at best, an inappropriate way to brand justice work, a kind of double edged sword, or better yet, double bladed lightsaber. At worst, the way of branding our initiatives is frightened with the very violence that our justice work seeks to counter. Man, this is crazy town. I wasn't going to read this whole article, but now I feel like we have to. I feel like if we had played Unwoke Bingo on this article, someone probably would have gotten a blackout bingo on this article. That's what's going to happen. Jedi connects justice initiatives to corporate capital. Jedi is more than a name, it's a product. Circulating the product's name can promote the benefit of corporation it owns, even if it does not mean to. We're going to get to capitalism. They're going to say capitalism. Watch, they always say capitalism. We are, in effect, providing the corporation, Disney, with a form of free advertising, commodifying and cheapening our justice work in the process. Such informal co-branding entangles our initiatives in Disney's morally messy past and present. It may also serve to rebrand and whitewash Disney by linking one of its signature product lines to social justice. After all, Disney has a long and troubling history of circulating racist, sexist, heterosexist, and orientalist narratives and imagery, which the corporation and its subsidiaries like Pixar are publicly reckoning with. Because Disney wasn't woke already, now they're being called out in Scientific American for not being woke enough. Furthermore, Disney is an overtly political entity, critiqued not only for its labor practices, but also for its political donations and lobbying. Joining forces with Disney's multimedia empire is thus a dangerous co-branding strategy for justice advocates and activists. This form of inadvertent woke-washing extracts ethical currency from so-called Jedi work, robbing from its moral reserves to farther enrich its corporate capital. They basically said capitalism. Aligning justice work with Star Wars risks threatening inclusion and sense of belonging. While an overarching goal of Jedi initiatives is to promote inclusion, the term Jedi might make people feel excluded. Well, we wouldn't want that. Star Wars is popular, but divisive. Identifying our initiatives with it may nudge those closer to the realm of fandom, manufacturing in-groups and out-groups, those unfamiliar or uncomfortable with Star Wars, including those hurt by the messages it sends, may feel alienated by the parade of jokes, puns, and references surrounding the term Jedi. Consider as one example its gender exclusionary potential. Again, how is this gender exclusionary? Princess Leia was like one of the ultimate female heroes, and now Star Wars is gender exclusionary. Okay. Studies suggest that the presence of Star Wars and Star Trek memorabilia, such as posters, in the computer science classroom can reinforce masculine stereotypes about computer science, contributing to women's sense that they don't belong in the field. Relatedly, research indicates that even for self-identified female fans of Star Wars, a sense of belonging within the fandom can be experienced as highly conditional, contingent upon performances proving their conformity to a pre-existing gender norm of dominant fan culture. At a moment when many professional sectors, including higher education, are seeking to eliminate barriers to inclusion and to change the narrative around who counts as a scientist, political scientist, STEM professional, or historian, adopting a term like Star Wars seems like an ironic move backwards. The abbreviation Jedi can distract from justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. When you think of the word Jedi, what comes to mind? Chances are good that for many, the immediate answer isn't the concept of justice. Instead, this acronym will likely conjure a pageant of spaceships, lightsabers, and blaster-wielding stormtroopers. Even if we set aside the four cautions above, the acronym Jedi still evokes imagery that diverts attention from the meanings of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Such distractions exacerbate existing problems and challenges endemic to the institutional justice work. For instance, it is already the case that in institutional contexts, terms like justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion are routinely undefined, blah, blah, blah. While we focused our attention on the term Jedi, the cautions above provide us with a list, and then they make a list of qualifications. I don't know, guys. What do you think? I actually think that this is a great thing. I think that this is a positive thing. I think that not co-opting Star Wars, again, I'm not a Star Wars super fan or anything. That's my husband. But I'm pretty sure my husband is going to feel pretty good about the fact that he doesn't have to worry about the woke left, like, claiming one of his favorite things in the world so that he can still watch the movies and feel good about them. Except for that last set of movies that comes out, he didn't like those at all. So we don't even talk about those. Those are a bad memory. All right. But that's not the only crazy thing. Check this out. Check this out. Check out what Harvard is doing. This is just one of those like interesting threads that I saw on Twitter. So, while pop culture is screwing around with Super Mario Brothers and deciding whether or not they want to co-opt Star Wars, Harvard is breaking the law when it comes to hiring people. Blatantly breaking the law when it comes to their hiring practices. Let's read what they're doing from this thread from Scott Greenfield on Twitter. Spoke with a guy, and of course, this is a thread on Twitter, so we have to take it with a grain of salt. We don't know that he's saying the absolute truth, but if he is telling the truth, Harvard is doing things they shouldn't be. Spoke with a guy who applied for a certain job at a certain university on Mass Ave, whose name begins with an H. Harvard. It required a unique set of qualifications and skills, and this guy possessed them, one of the very few who did. After being interviewed and not hearing back for 3 months, he finally received a letter informing him that they regret that they cannot hire him because he was not qualified. He was overwhelmingly qualified and possibly one of the few who had the unique qualifications. As it happened, I also know the person whose name was on the regret letter. Live long enough and you get to know a lot of people. And it was someone I could talk to, so I asked, off the record. Received a reply that not only was he fully qualified, but the only qualified applicant for the job. So why didn't you give it to him? I inquired. He was a straight white male. The committee dinged him for his failure to meet the demographic demands of the university. Now, let me explain something. When it comes to hiring, it is not legal for any organization, let alone a tax exempt organization like Harvard, to make hiring decisions based on attributes that are not directly relevant to a person's ability to do the job. So, when I do work with organizations, the main piece of work I do is around personality assessments, work style assessments, helping people to understand how they communicate in the office, things they might need to adjust to communicate differently with colleagues, stuff like that. Now, oftentimes people will ask, can we do these work style assessments in the hiring process to make sure the person is a good fit on the team? Are they going to fit in with the overall culture of the team? That can be a really helpful tool in making sure that things aren't disrupted, that you have a good interpersonal group in the office, and that everyone's bouncing off each other and balancing out each other's tendencies. However, the answer I always give them is it's probably not a good idea, because if you give the applicant a work style assessment during the hiring process, you cannot, under any circumstances, use the outcomes of that assessment to base your hiring decision off of. Because regardless of what the outcomes are of that assessment, they do not impact whether or not the person you are hiring has the ability to actually go in and perform the core functions of the job. So for that reason, I always advise using against assessments in hiring processes, because unless you can prove that that assessment directly contributes to a person's ability to go in and do the core functions of the job, you are not hiring legally. It's not legal. You can get sued. You can get sued really, really easily for that crap. What Harvard has done here is basically say, off the record, of course, that they are basing their hiring decisions off of demographics. Whether or not a person is a white male has no bearing on their ability to do the job. Therefore, if this is true, the person this is about should sue Harvard immediately, because this is not legal. It is not legal to base hiring decisions off the color of someone's skin. And this to me sounds like Harvard's doing exactly that. Now, that's something that is not exclusive to Harvard. I have heard of many universities doing this exact same thing. Hopefully someone starts suing them someday. But I want to switch the topic to a different form of racism for our next one. This article from The Federalist. Black Lives Matter is threatening an uprising against racist vaccine mandates. Now, of course, we reference the CDC for all of the information on vaccines. I'm not making any commentary on the effectiveness of vaccines. You should contact your medical professional. I am not a doctor. Don't listen to a word I have to say. Contact the CDC, talk to your doctor, all that good stuff. But, I've been thinking for the past couple weeks about the fact that all last summer and last fall, leading up to the election, racism was deemed a public health crisis. Who remembers that? Who remembers the fact that basically all throughout 2020, racism was declared to be a public health crisis? It was all over the media. They talked about it all the time. City councils passed resolutions Racism was a public health crisis. That was why the Black Lives Matter protests were allowed to be so big in the middle of a pandemic. Racism was such an important public health crisis that it actually usurped the public health crisis that we legitimately had at that time, which was a literal pandemic. Racism was more important than a literal pandemic. I bring this up because has anyone heard any talk from the media about how racism is a public health crisis lately? Because I haven't. What does that mean? Did we solve racism? Racism was so important last year and it has completely disappeared from the conversation this year. Racism is no longer a public health crisis. Congratulations, everyone. We solved racism. We did it. Racism is not a public health crisis anymore. It has been usurped by the unvaccinated as a public health crisis. Now, it's interesting, though, that Black Lives Matter noticed this, wasn't it? It's interesting that Black Lives Matter has decided that vaccine mandates are a public health crisis. And I'm just going to say this right now. If YouTube demonetizes this or gives me some stupid bullshit strike in any way for talking about this article, I just think that's a little bit racist, YouTube. I just think that's a little bit racist. Let's read. Let's read about what Black Lives Matter is doing. It's a rule in the national media that vaccine hesitancy is worthy of shame, scorn, right up until it collides with their most precious cause, the Black Lives Matter movement. Hesitant white nurses? Outcast. Hesitant white Facebook moms? Shun. Hesitant white Trump supporters? Guillotine. But there's oddly been no prescription for the Black Lives Matter crew in New York who are accusing the city of racial discrimination by mandating vaccines for public indoor activity. Hank Newsom, co-founder and chairman of Black Lives Matter Greater New York, was quoted in Saturday's New York Times saying that restaurants are using vaccine mandates to enforce their racist beliefs and excluding Black patrons. Well, we don't want that. We had just cured racism, guys. We had just cured racism. Racism was no longer a public health crisis, and then Bill de Blasio in New York City brings racism back as a public health crisis. God, these white liberals, they always screw everything up. Just when we had solved racism, Bill de Blasio brought racism back. At a protest Monday in front of New York restaurants Carmine's, Newsom, also a co-founder of the group, said of vaccine mandates, what is going to stop the Gestapo, I mean the NYPD, from rounding up Black people, from snatching them off the train, off the bus? Do you guys remember after the election? I think it was after the election. I went on a whole tear for like a couple of months where I was like, I basically said like Black Lives Matter as a populist movement has more in common with MAGA as a populist movement than they think. And there might actually be good overlap between like the populist wings of both sides to come together and work together and find some common ground. It's like the Rainbow Coalition, man. This has all happened before. And here we are again. History repeating itself right in front of us. She further issued the threat that BLM was putting the city on notice that your mandate will not be another racist social distance practice and that Black people are not going to stand by or you will see another uprising. She said vaccine verification is not a free passport to racism. The catalyst for those remarks was an incident in Carmine's last week wherein 3 Black women from Texas were charged for assaulting a hostess at the restaurant, allegedly over a vaccine verification dispute, and as a lawyer for the woman subsequently claimed, because the hostess is of Asian descent and used a racial slur. Now, we all know, in the woke hierarchy of oppression, Black people are always at the top of the hierarchy. Asians are typically down towards the bottom. Every once in a while, Asians get elevated, but Asians never, ever, 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 ever are elevated above Black people in the woke oppression hierarchy. A lawyer representing Carmine's has disputed the allegation about a racial slur. Video footage of the incident includes no audio, but what can be seen is that three women were being led inside the restaurant by a member of the staff who was not the hostess. Once inside, the hostess is seen exiting to return to her post when all three customers turn to follow her back outside. One of them approaches the hostess from behind and begins speaking as the others circled. A fight ensues. Lawyers for both sides agree, though the dispute was not over the vaccination status of the three women, but over additional members of the party, several men who did not have vaccine cards. The details are kind of beside the point, though. Black residents make up a higher rate of cases, hospitalizations, and deaths in New York City than white residents. They're also vaccinated at a lower rate, with 45% of New York City's adult Black population having been fully vaccinated versus 56% of white adults. Hmm. Wasn't it Ibram X. Kendi that said that racism is like the cause for any racial disparities? Seems to me that New York City and Bill de Blasio is being a little bit racist. I'm just saying. It's okay, Bill. We're all a little bit racist sometimes. It's just the way the cookie crumbles. I don't care if anyone, regardless of race, chooses not to receive a vaccine against COVID. That's their dice to roll. Check the CDC. I'm just reading the article, YouTube. But imagine a white Trump supporter saying his right to dine indoors among strangers shall not be infringed. Let's see. Dr. Lena Wen would be on CNN for 24 hours straight, assuring us that there is no constitutional entitlement to Restaurant Week. But because we're talking about Black Lives Matter, which can do no wrong in the media's eyes, suddenly vaccine mandates aren't so pressing an issue. Suddenly, groups of people with specific demographic raging against the mandates aren't so worthy of ridicule. Remember that the next time a mousy CNN correspondent does one of those ungodly long statements on harm to public health caused by vaccine hesitancy in rural communities, Trump supporters, this isn't about public health, it's about politics. Just when we thought we cured racism, the woke left brought it back. Guys, if you're enjoying the stream so far, mount that like button for me. Make sure you are subscribed on whatever platform you're watching on, whether that be YouTube or Rockfin or Odyssey or Facebook or any of those good things. Sam, you're being kind of a douche in the chat, and so if you're going to be disruptive in the chat, I'm gonna block you, dude. You're being a dick. Stop it. Okay? Next time you're going to get blocked. I don't want to do that. You've been around a long time, dude, but do not come into the chat and be disruptive. If you don't want to watch the show, then go somewhere else. But don't be disruptive in the chat. All right, moving on. This is a really interesting story. This is a really interesting story that did not get enough attention this week, but this is actually something I'm going to be talking about because this is actually one of the more fascinating cancelings that I've seen in a while. How racial anxiety conquered an orchestra and crushed a career. Inside the woke convulsions at the Nashville Symphony. This is from the Washington Free Beacon. Most people haven't heard of James Zimmerman, but most have heard him. A decorated musician with a long string of acoustic accolades, Zimmerman, 39, has made the sound of his clarinet difficult to avoid. He played at President Barack Obama's second inaugural, has recorded tracks for best-selling video games, and helped create Walt Disney's New World theme. Zimmerman was also the principal clarinetist of the Nashville Symphony Orchestra for more than a decade. That is, until the orchestra fired him last February over accusations of racial harassment. To hear his accusers tell it, Zimmerman had insulted, intimidated, and even stalked his Black colleagues, going so far as to menacingly drive by their homes. Human Resources had already warned the clarinetist in 2019 that his behavior could be grounds for dismissal. The orchestra claimed in its termination letter to Zimmerman, his refusal to heed the warning was ostensibly why he was fired in 2020. But 6 of Zimmerman's ex-colleagues and the orchestra's own documents tell a very different story. They suggest that Zimmerman himself was the target of a witch hunt instigated by a black oboist who Zimmerman had stuck his neck out to help. Now listen, I'm going to be transparent. I know James Zimmerman. I knew about this story before it was released. I have heard his side of the story. This story is actually legitimately crazy. This is a story. Here's what I want you guys to listen for. This is a story of someone who is so enveloped in woke culture that he actually ended up hurting his own career in the process because he was looking at everyone around him and looking for them to act racist towards him. The fact that this guy was convinced, this oboist that we're going to learn about, the fact that this oboist was convinced that everyone around him was a racist caused him to focus more on looking for racism than it did on him focusing on his music. It's holding him back. This is a clear example of how wokeism holds people back that adhere to it. Let's move on. Zimmerman also never warned that he could lose it. Hang on. Yes. Zimmerman was also never warned that he could lose his job, according to one of his colleagues, Brad Mansell, who accompanied Zimmerman to HR. I was there, Mansell said. The termination letter flat out lied. That alone would have been grounds for the orchestra union to file a grievance, and most likely for Zimmerman to have been reinstated, but the union took no action on his behalf. Instead, Zimmerman, who became an early victim of an ideological Cold War that had turned hot in the summer of 2020 when accusations of racism knocked journalists, poets, and political scientists from their loftiest perches. This is not a story of hero and villains, crude categories that hardly capture the main characters, so much as it is a story of institutions, an orchestra roiled by racial anxieties, a human resources department deputized to soothe them, and a union caught in the crossfire. It is also a story of how misunderstandings can snowball into moral dramas, gaining momentum with each successive snafu. The snowball was set in motion when Zimmerman stood up for a merit based hiring at the symphony. From New York to London to Vienna, orchestras around the world have faced calls to diversify their ensemble, sometimes through race conscious means. Anthony Tomasi, a New York Times music critic, even called for ending blind auditions. The Nashville Symphony was not immune to these pressures, having embarked on several grant funded diversity initiatives after 2017, after the orchestra broke its own rules to hire an oboist many regarded as unqualified. Zimmerman took an almost obsessive stand. The result was a hushed discontent that crescendoed into crisis as the orchestra tried and failed to contain the tensions it created. At the center of those tensions was Titus Underwood, who would become the first black principal oboist at a major orchestra. His rise marked the start of Zimmerman's fall. It was also marked the triumph of tokenism at the Nashville Symphony, which denied Underwood a chance to succeed on his own merits. In an ironic twist, it was Zimmerman's zeal for meritocracy that helped Underwood rise in the first place. Okay, so what you're going to hear is a story of the Nashville Symphony Orchestra basically brought in this black oboist to satisfy a diversity requirement. Most of the orchestra thought that he was not very good at his job. And in response to that, the orchestra made him go through a blind audition process where he auditioned for his role against like 150 other people. And you're going to find out he actually made it. He was the one they selected. Even though the entire orchestra thought that he sucked, he was the one that was actually selected in the blind audition process. And then because the whole orchestra thought he sucked, they were going to just deny that result and they were going to hire someone else. But our hero, James Zimmerman, said, no, no, no. You made him go through a blind audition process. You're going to stick by the results. He did it. He won. Let's read. Underwood joined the Nashville Symphony in 2017 as a temporary replacement for the outgoing principal oboist. To get the job permanently, he needed to win a blind audition held in March 2019. Underwood's playing had been inconsistent since his arrival at the symphony. Members of the Nashville Symphony Woodwind section told the Washington Free Beacon, but he would now be given a chance to prove himself without any baggage, provided he remain anonymous. But Underwood was inadvertently outed In the final round of the audition committee, including Zimmerman, had narrowed it down to one candidate, but whoever was behind the curtain wasn't impressed. That meant they had two options: send the candidate home and hold another audition, or give the candidate a trial period and make the decision at the end of it. Before they could finish deliberating, a violinist, having misjudged the need for anonymity, burst out from behind the screen and announced that the candidate was Titus Underwood. Underwood's outing tipped the scales against him. The audition committee had been leaning towards a trial run but backpedaled once they learned the candidate had been struggling in the orchestra for over a year. Giancarlo Guerrero, the symphony maestro, was especially sour on Underwood, according to three members of the committee who stressed that the principal oboe is one of the most important seats in any orchestra. At Guerrero's urging, the committee agreed to send Underwood on his way without telling him what happened. So this guy was hated by the orchestra, made it through a blind audition process, and they hated him so much that they were going to deny him the outcome at the end of the blind audition process. What I want people to take from this is this guy has talent. This guy made it through a blind audition process that had like 150 other people auditioning against him. It's not as though he doesn't have the talent. It's just when he's not focusing on what he needs to do, he focuses on woke crap that completely deflects his ability to get along with other people. Sickened by what he described as a disgusting breach of fairness, Zimmerman urged his colleagues to stick with their initial inclination and offer Underwood a trial period. If Titus had remained anonymous, as he should have, he would have been given a rightly earned opportunity to prove his mettle, Zimmerman wrote in an email to the committee the next day. The orchestra relented and gave Underwood a 2-week trial period in keeping with the terms of the orchestra's union contract. If the committee was satisfied with the oboist's performance during those 2 weeks, he would be awarded a permanent position. However, the committee ultimately voted Underwood now had a chance to win the job based on merit by the book. But a vote was never held. After the first week, Guerrero unilaterally appointed Underwood without the consent of the committee, a direct violation of the orchestra's own rules. This unprecedented step, several musicians said, seemed to have been motivated by Underwood's race. So, a guy that made it through the blind audition process literally became the diversity hire. He became the diversity hire. Even though he made it through the blind audition process, they didn't go back for the vote because they knew that if they did the vote, per the union's rules, this guy would end up losing. All right. I know this is a little bit of a long one, guys, but I think that this is a really, really, really important story and something to really think about. Earlier in the week, Guerrero had called the entire committee into his office and urged them to vote early for Underwood before the trial period was up, according to three members of the committee. When the committee refused, Guerrero began calling committee members into his office individually. Meetings that were supposed to be about artistic merit and feedback were turned into something else. The president of the orchestra union, Dave Pomeroy, wrote in an email to colleagues. Something else was diversity, said Jeff Bailey, the trumpet player on the committee. He and Zimmerman both recall a frazzled-looking Guerrero saying they needed to trust him and implying the outside pressure was being applied. I've never seen him that stressed, Bailey said. Guerrero and Underwood did not respond to a request for comment. The president of the Nashville Symphony, Alan Valentine, declined to comment. Things in the orchestra were tense, and members of the audition committee were furious, especially Zimmerman, who says he made zero efforts to hide his frustration, not at Underwood himself, but at the procedural chicanery that they had boosted him. Underwood's intonation issues added fuel to the fire. Woodwinds often stayed after rehearsal to tune difficult passages, and the principal oboe is the leader of the woodwinds. Since Underwood was struggling in that role, Zimmerman ended up asking him to stay late to finesse a section. Underwood seemed to take that personally, one woodwind said. With tensions in the symphony rising, Underwood launched a human resources complaint. Okay, so just to make it really clear, James Zimmerman went to bat for this black principal oboist that no one liked. James Zimmerman was the only person to go to bat for him in this entire process. And what happened was the black principal oboist turned against the only person that had his back and reported him to HR because Zimmerman asked Titus to stay late and to work on a specific session. And Titus said, "You're racist for asking me to stay late to work on a section." This is a direct example of how wokeism doesn't just hurt the people it targets, it also hurts the people who embrace it. The complaint described an incident that had taken place over a month before the botched audition, and as far as Zimmerman was concerned, he was already resolved. In early February 2019, Zimmerman had asked Underwood whether or not it would be okay for him, a white person, to use the N-word in his rendition of a rap song. Underwood said yes, but Zimmerman nonetheless apologized after singing the slur. The N-word did not feel good, he recalls telling Underwood. Zimmerman explained all of this over the course of 2 meetings with Human Resources, neither of which resulted in disciplinary action. But racial tensions had spiked just as the bureaucratic apparatus for adjudicating them was expanding. In November 2019, the orchestra hired its first equity manager. 2 months later, a newly christened Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging team held a luncheon on the racial power dynamics in American orchestras. In an audio recording of the lunch, Underwood can be heard saying that all Americans live in a system of white supremacy, thus persisted since the founding. The orchestra was also hiring more musicians sympathetic to this worldview, one of whom, Amelia Carlo, seemed to take an immediate dislike to Zimmerman, the clarinetist, and other members of the orchestra said. An alum of the various diversity programs and a close friend of Underwood's, Carlo rebuffed Zimmerman's efforts to get to know him, Zimmerman said. When Zimmerman mentioned Carlo's dog, for example, Carlo responded, "Yeah, and he'll fuck anybody up." Zimmerman told the Washington Free Beacon it felt like a threat. Carlo did not respond to multiple requests for comment. Soon, Carlo and Underwood seeded a new narrative about Zimmerman, that he was not just racially insensitive, but potentially predatory. The narrative was seated behind Zimmerman's back, beginning an unofficial HR complaint with which the clarinetist was never notified. According to emails in Zimmerman's personal file, Underwood told HR representatives in December 2019 that Zimmerman was obsessed with him and Carlo. Zimmerman had asked detailed questions about Carlo and Underwood's living situations. Underwood alleges to the point that Underwood was getting very concerned about his safety. The allegations contained a grain of truth. Zimmerman had been asking those questions, but only because he was looking to buy a new house in the area, according to 3 of his colleagues, who he had had conversations with about Nashville real estate. And this is an example of how, like, when you are looking at things through a woke mindset, everything you see, every conversation you have will be clouded by that woke mindset. Like, so they took something that was simply about, like, this guy wanted to buy a new house, and they made it about racism. James is an odd guy, Bailey said, but he's not a stalker, and he's certainly not a racist. Yet by February 2020, rumors were spreading. One day, a violinist in the orchestra approached Zimmerman and told him there was talk of a stalking allegation. According to the rumor, HR had received a complaint that Zimmerman was deliberately driving by Underwood and Carlo's house. Again, this was half true. Zimmerman often drove by Carlo's street to avoid late afternoon traffic, as did several colleagues. The botched audition, the initial HR meeting, and the ongoing tensions in the win section had taken a toll on Zimmerman. Now news of an undisclosed allegation pushed him over the edge. "I really think he was just driven crazy," a colleague said. At 1:15 a.m. on February 21st, Zimmerman sent an email that sources described as manic. Addressed to Carlo and CC'd to Human Resources, the 5-page missive was disjointed, difficult to follow, and in its choice of words, potentially minatory, referencing a brewing war with the prospect of physical harm. "I saw it as a cry for help," said one of Zimmerman's colleagues, who added that Zimmerman seemed concerned for his own safety. In a paragraph recounting Carlo's comment about his dog, Zimmerman noted that his family owned a gun. The clarinetist was placed on leave the next day, and armed guards were stationed outside the symphony. Less than a week later, he was fired. The dismissal sent shockwaves through the orchestra. "Nobody I knew thought the right thing had happened," said one bass player. "People were crying." Asked whether or not the email had pressed violence, 6 members of the Nashville Symphony answered no. "No thread of my being thought that Zimmerman was violent, a bass player said. He added that the firing seemed like a way for management to bury Underwood's audition fiasco, which had become an open secret in the orchestra world. The orchestra union, meanwhile, refused to go to bat for Zimmerman. Mansell said the union president Dave Pomeroy was clearly worried about optics. So essentially what happened is that this guy, this clarinetist, who had been with the Nashville Symphony Orchestra for over 10 years, had helped out this black principal oboist and was the only person in the entire orchestra to have his back. And in thanks for that, the Nashville Symphony fired him after this black oboist threw him under the bus. This is a fascinating article. It is a fascinating story. And it's a story that I really think that people should think a lot about. Now, I don't have the list of articles in the link below yet, but I will be adding them after the stream and I will be posting them in my locals community. I definitely recommend everyone go and take a look at this article. It's in the Washington Free Beacon, How Racial Anxiety Conquered an Orchestra and Crushed a Career. I will be having James on the channel at some point in the future. I definitely want to get him in front of you guys so that you can hear him tell the story himself, because it is a batshit insane story. And the saddest part of this entire thing for me is that the black principal oboist that everyone hated, that everyone didn't think was good enough, found it within him to make it through an extremely intensive blind audition process. He always had the talent to be there. He could always do it. But the thing that held him back from playing nicely with the rest of the orchestra is because he was convinced that everyone around him was a racist and that no one wanted him there. And it is impossible to perform up to your level of perfection if you're convinced that everyone around you hates you. Listen, I didn't go, like, I played the clarinet all through high school. Fun fact. I played the clarinet. I did all the band things. And the thing I know about music is that it's a dance. It's not just about you and your instrument. It's a dance with the other people that you're playing with. And if you aren't dancing, if you aren't allowing the other person to lead when they're supposed to lead, if you're not taking direction, if you're not bouncing off one another effectively, then the music does not work at its highest level. And so when you're talking about something like this, interpersonal relationships are key. And what we see here is the story of a talented oboist who basically threw himself under the bus because he was so woke that he was convinced all his colleagues were against him. He still has the role today. No one thinks he's good enough for it because he ended up being the diversity hire. It's a fascinating article. I hope you guys all take the time to look at it. But we're going to move on for right now. And actually, we're actually going to, I was going to cover this article. Maybe I'll do this in another video this week, but I'm already running long on the stream. But I do want to make sure people know about this article. I'll do it maybe in a video. The experts somehow overlooked authoritarians on the left. Many psychologists wrongly assume that coercive attitudes only exist among conservatives. You think? You think that psychologists have discovered that the left can behave in authoritarian ways? F it. Let's do it. Let's do it. We'll go a little bit long. That's okay. Actually, how long is it? Okay, it's a relatively short one. Okay, let's do it. Donald Trump's rise to power generated a flood of media coverage and academic research on authoritarianism, or at least the kind of authoritarianism that exists on the political right. Over the past several years, some researchers have theorized Trump couldn't have won in 2016 without support from Americans who deplore political compromise and want leaders to rule with a strong hand. However, an ambitious new study on the subject by Emory University researcher Thomas Costello and 5 colleagues should settle the question. It proposes a rigorous new measure of anti-democratic attitudes on the left. And by drawing on a survey of 7,250 adults, that is a huge sample size. That is a ginormous sample size. Costello's team firmly establishes that such attitudes exist on both sides of the American electorate. Intriguingly, the researchers found that some common traits between left wing and right wing authoritarians include a preference for social uniformity, prejudice towards different others, willingness to real group authority to coerce behavior, you think? Cognitive rigidity, aggression, punitiveness towards perceived enemies, and outsized concern for hierarchy and moral absolutism. Has anyone seen these attributes on the left lately? Has anyone seen these attributes on the left? A preference for social uniformity, prejudice towards different others, willingness to wield group authorities to coerce behavior, cognitive rigidity, aggression, punitiveness towards perceived enemies, outside concern for hierarchy, and moral absolutism. They look pretty familiar to me, to be honest. Batty girl, I'll be posting them later. Or you can join my locals and I'll be posting them there. Published last month in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, the Costello team paper is persuasive to the point where you have to wonder, how could past researchers have overlooked left-wing authoritarianism for so long? I have some thoughts about that. For 70 years, the lore of the social sciences has been that authoritarianism was found exclusively on the political right. Those people are morons. I'm sorry. Let's see. The Trump era, hang on. They concluded that the authoritarian type of human, the type of person whose ecstatic support allows for someone like the H word to exercise power, was found only among conservatives. In the mid 1990s, the influential Canadian psychologist Bob described left wing authoritarianism as the Loch Ness Monster. Subsequently, other psychologists reached the same conclusion. The Trump era has deepened psychology's conventional wisdom that authoritarians are almost always conservatives. The insurrection at the Capitol last year showed the urgency of understanding the phenomenon. And this right here shows you precisely, to be frank, how little psychologists understand about the political right. Because not all conservatives are Trump supporters, and not all Trump supporters are conservatives. And yet, calls to deplatform controversial speakers and online campaigns to get people fired for heterodox views suggest that a commitment to open democratic norms is eroding, at least in some quarters on the left. Much farther along the authoritarian continuum, people purporting to be anti-racist or anti-fascist protesters have set fires and committed acts of violence since the summer of 2020. These acts stop short of, say, the 1970s bombing campaign led by the far-left Weather Underground. Yeah, I mean, it is a little ironic, isn't it, that the Weather Underground existed in the 70s, and yet no one thought that this type of attitude could exist on the left. Okay, but surely call the prevailing wisdom into doubt. Supporters of revolutionary regimes overseas have demonstrated even more clearly that some people on the left try to get their way through intimidation and force. China? You think? But one reason left wing authoritarianism barely shows up in social psychology research is that most academics in the field are based at institutions where the prevailing attitudes are far to the left of society as a whole. Scholars who personally support the left's social vision, such as redistributing income, countering racism, and more, may simply be slow to identify authoritarianism among people with similar goals. One doesn't need to believe that left wing authoritarians are as numerous or as threatening as their right wing counterparts, okay, to grasp both phenomena are a problem. While liberals, both inside and outside of academia, may derive some comfort rather, from believing the left wing authoritarian doesn't exist, that fiction ignores a significant source of instability and polarization in our politics and society. In research that led to the authoritarian personality, Enduro and his colleagues developed an F scale to measure fascist attitudes. Altmaier later drew on that research to create a scale measuring right-wing authoritarianism by assessing certain personality traits, blah, 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 blah. But later, when Altmaier turned his attention to left-wing authoritarianism, LWA, He erroneously assumed it would be identical to the right wing variety. His LNA scale briefly identified any subjects. He either had set the threshold too high or he was measuring the wrong attitudes. Costello and his colleagues started fresh. They developed what eventually became a list of 39 statements capturing sentiment such as, "We need to replace the established order by any means necessary." That sounds familiar. And "I should have had the right not to be exposed to offensive views." Subjects were asked to score the statement on a scale of 1 to 5. They showed a trait that researchers described as anti hierarchical aggression by agreeing strongly that if I could remake society, I would put people who currently have the most privilege at the bottom. By agreeing with statements such as getting rid of inequality is important to protecting the so called free speech right, they showed an attitude called top down censorship. And they showed what research team called anti conventionalism. By endorsing statements such as, "I cannot imagine myself becoming friends with a political conservative." Costello and his colleagues administered their new LWA index and Altemeyer's original RWA scale. Some differences emerged between left wing and right wing authoritarians. The former were more open to new experiences and more receptive to science than the latter, for example. Yet the new research documents a huge overlap in authoritarian structure, a shared psychological core, as the authors put it, between high scorers on their new LWA index and the original RWA scale, which they also administered. The authoritarian mentality, whether on the far left or the far right, the authors conclude, exerts powerful pressures to maintain discipline among members, advocate aggressive and censorious means of stifling opposition, and believe in a top down absolutist approach. Perhaps the most telling insight emerged from trying to separate subjects' political identity into authoritarianism. They found that your ideology, whether you're a progressive or a Trumpist, as though there's nothing in between those two things, my God, is a secondary matter. Whether your values and beliefs are authoritarian is not more fundamental is or not. Let me try again. Whether your values and beliefs are authoritarian or not is more fundamental. Psychologically speaking, authoritarianism comes first. Isn't that interesting? So they're saying that it really doesn't matter if you're on the left or the right. If you are disposed to have authoritarian tendencies, then you're disposed to have authoritarian tendencies. I asked Costello whether left wing or right wing authoritarians exist in equal proportion. It's hard to know the ratio, he said, making clear that a subject's receptivity to authoritarianism falls on a continuum like others. Personality characteristics or even height or using hard and fast categories can still be tricky. I'm not going to read the rest of this. I'll make sure I pin it below. But I just like that psychologists are starting to discover that authoritarians can exist on both sides. Who knew? Who knew? Oh, wait, anyone who ever took a political compass test. Martin over on Facebook says, Dr. Carlin is well to my left, yet I willingly paid the $50 up front for KB Locals. Thank you, Martin, for the support. I certainly appreciate that. All right, guys, we're gonna do one more story for today. It's a good one. Check it out. A nice little happy way to end the stream. WWE pins woke left with controversial new wrestler. How many wrestling fans do we have on the stream today? How many people watched wrestling growing up? I loved professional wrestling growing up. I did. I loved professional wrestling so much. I never missed a pay-per-view. Fun fact, I actually went to WrestleMania one year. When I was in Boston, I was a senior in high school. I had the best flipping seats. You could actually, if you watched WrestleMania, it was the year that Stone Cold Steve Austin won the title for the first time. If you watched that WrestleMania, you probably saw me on camera. I was sitting directly opposite the cameras. It was awesome. It was the best. But The Undertaker was my favorite. Always was my favorite. I was reminiscing when The Undertaker retired. What was it, like a year or two ago? Like, oh my God. But The Undertaker was my favorite wrestler by far. I like some others too, but The Undertaker was my favorite. Anyway, let's read about what the WWE did. And I'm so old, by the way, that I was watching this stuff when it was still the WWF. So it's actually weird for me to call it the WWE. I hate that, but WWF was my jam. Okay. WWE has just body slammed the woke left. In the latest broadcast Tuesday of NXT 2.0, which showcases up and coming pro wrestler stars from its developmental system, WWE included a character called Joe Gacy, who immediately raised the eyebrows of fans in the arena and the television audience when he started spouting some of the trademark rhetoric of the woke left. "Tonight, the ring is a safe space," Gacy said, sitting in a folding chair in the middle of the ring, the spotlight solely on him. NXT 2.0 is full of conflict, from the smallest microaggression to the most heinous grudges. This is a place where we can settle our differences. I come to you tonight with a mindset of conflict resolution, where I don't need to use my male privilege to get what I want. A smattering of boos could be heard in the fans in attendance at the Capitol Wrestling Center in Orlando, Florida. It was unclear whether they found Gacy or his message offensive, or if they objected to politics invading their pro wrestling, sports entertainment safe space. But Gacy was undeterred as the camera zoomed in. His smile dripped with something that wasn't quite sincerity as he finished his monologue. "I understand, just like you, that life isn't fair," he continued. "I believe that we can achieve unity and tolerance for all of us, and I can be the man that will show you that we can achieve peace in this safe space, and it starts tonight." Confused? That was probably by design, and the NXT announcing team drove the message home in their own bewilderment over Gacy's message. "That made no sense to me whatsoever," said Wade Barrett, an NXT commentator and former WWE wrestler. "I've snapped my arm in the ring. I've separated a shoulder. I've broken my nose more times than I can count. The ring is anything but safe." However, Gacy's words turned out to be just words once the bell rang, despite flashes of promise. He was pinned in less than 5 minutes by his opponent, Cameron Grimes. Gacy insisted on hugging a befuddled Grimes after his match. The quiet crowd seemed less than impressed. "This guy looked at the world a little differently than you or I, which is not necessarily a bad thing," Barrett said. It remains to be seen whether or not it'll work for Gacy. It's unclear whether Joe Gacy will return or if he is a one-time WWE experiment. Critics may argue WWE may be attempting to generate some headlines as rival promotion AEW has created loads of buzz, blah, 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 blah. I dislike that the WWE pinned a woke wrestler in his first match. We'll see how that goes. I don't know. I don't watch wrestling today. Does anyone keep up with wrestling today? Does it suck? Because back in the day, it was awesome. Back in the day, I watched it. This is how old I am. I watched it when WCW was warring against the WWF. That was the best. Did anyone remember that? Did anyone watch wrestling back in the day like that? Chat in and let me know. It was the best. The feud of WCW against the WWF was the best. And my favorite was ECW. ECW back in the day, man, it was so good. Raven and Tommy Dreamer and the Sandman and the Blue World Order. That was like, I should go find my ECW tapes from back in the day. I still have them. They're still in my basement. But my God, ECW was so good. And then there was that one episode of Raw where ECW took over the episode, and I was just like, oh my God, what is even happening? Okay, I'm reminiscing a little bit too much, but that's all we have for this week, guys. I did have a story about the Loch Ness Monster reemerging, but maybe I'll do a separate video on that this week. Again, if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you join us every Sunday. Hopefully I won't be losing my voice like I am tonight, but that's okay. I do these at 5 p.m. every Sunday, just a little recap of some of the more interesting news from the week. Make sure you join my locals. I'll be posting the list of stories in my locals right after this. You can join as a supporter, $5 a month or $50 for the year. You can join for free as well if you want to. You can also make a one-time gift if you want to do that. And of course, pick up this Don't Be a Vaxhole shirt on bringammo.com. Get yourself some other Brain Ammo merchandise too. Again, you can always get 10% off your order using my first name as a promo code, KARLYN. It's my whole name. You get 10% off your whole order. That's all I have for this week, guys. We'll see you soon.